Hello guys, Furball the Hammy, your friendly neighborhood hamster, is back again for another Hypixel Skyblock video. With me constantly using terms like early, mid, late and endgame players, you may be wondering which type of player you fit in. And I've been receiving a lot of questions in my Discord DMs on this topic, so I have decided to just make this video to clear the doubts once and for all. So if you are impatient, here's the general idea of what early, mid, late and endgame players are. Please note that this is just merely my opinion and it is by no means the definition of late, mid or endgame players. It is just my definition of it, so if you feel differently, it's perfectly fine. Just comment down in the comment section down below. I read through all my comments, so just do that if you disagree. It's perfectly understandable. We all have different perspectives, okay? So yeah, with that, let us get on to the video. First and foremost, early game players would generally be players under my definition, referring to players who own Ender Armor or Protector or Old Dragon Armor with an aspect of the End, a Golem Sword, Ember Rod, and basically those kind of weapons. And basically players who are struggling with the lower floors of the End, who can't even do 4500 damage. Yeah, those are early game players. And on top of that, early game players who are in this category tend to have low level skills, with no skills going above level 15. Players in this category also tend to lack the knowledge on talismans and lack the knowledge on knowing the importance of talismans, which suggests little to no talismans as well as lacking in a lot of damage. And now moving on to mid-game players. Mid-game players under my definition refers to players whose best sets are young, wise and unstable dragon armor, along with a raider's axe, a leaping sword, or a silk edge along with a runan's bow. Players in this category are able to handle the bottom floor of the End, but unable to grind zealots yet, basically doing around 6000 to 11,000 damage. Players in this category have spent more time in the game and of course would have higher skills, averaging at around 18 to 20. And lastly, mid-game players would have around 15 to 20 talismans, or at least most of the easy to get talismans. And now moving on to late game players. Late game players under my definition refers to players whose best sets are strong dragon armor, mastiff armor and tarantula armor, along with a pigman sword or an aspect of the dragons and certainly a runan's bow. Players in this category are capable of dealing with zealots in the End and can start grinding them, basically doing more than 13,000 damage, and I will consider you as late game. Players in this category also will start to care more about their skill levels and skill averages due to the extra stats and damage given, and hence players in this category also tend to have a skill average of around 20 to 24. And certainly due to these category of players capable of killing zealots, they would have mastered the concept and importance of talismans and tend to have around 25 to 30 talismans, or basically a substantial amount of talismans. Players in this category also tend to have a total net worth of around 50 million coins to 100 million coins, along with decent skill averages. And now moving on to endgame players. Not going to lie, but the definition of endgame players is relatively tough due to the many routes players end up taking and due to different players valuing different items. For example, some might not want a 50 mil Midas or a legendary dragon pet, but will settle with late game weapons and gear. But what differentiates the late game player and the end game player who only has late game items is based on their net worth and average skills. That is the difference basically, and sometimes it comes down to these minor details. Endgame players under my definition, I can't really define it, but players who are endgame generally have superior dragon armor or perfect 12, along with a 50 mil Midas or a dragon pet or a pigman pet. Although unnecessary because not every endgame player would get these items, as some may prefer getting a Reaper Scythe, a Mosquito Bow or an Overflux Power Orb, or some may just prefer to save the money. Hence, it's really hard to define whether you are an endgame player just based on items. However, endgame players tend to have a total net worth of around 150 million coins or higher if they have low skills, or around 100 million plus coins in net worth if they have high level skills. Players in this category also tend to have average skills of 25 or higher, while some might have lower averages than 25 due to their focus on only one skill. For example, I personally do Slayers and I only care about combat, which explains my average skill level being 25, which is quite low for an endgame player, but I have a combat level of 40. This also makes endgame players hard to define, but I think a safe assumption would be having average skill levels of level 25, or if they have one super over leveled skill, maybe level 38 or higher, then maybe I would consider that as endgame skills. Players in this category are also likely to have almost finishing collecting every single talisman, having collected expensive talismans like the Red Claw artifacts, Hunter Rings, Seal of the Family, Tarantula talismans, and etc. But once again, it is a very nuanced and very hard to define because not everyone might want to get all the talismans. For example, some people might not want to get a Seal of the Family because they just think it's not worth, whereas some people think that getting a Hunter Ring is totally not worth, and some might feel that getting a Bait Ring is totally not worth. It doesn't mean that they aren't endgame, and because of that, it is relatively hard to justify, to put a pinpoint justification as to whether you are an endgame player or not. As mentioned, it is quite difficult to determine whether you are an endgame player, but I think if you have a net worth of 150 billion coins or more, you can safely consider yourself to be endgame. And with my definitions out of the way, here are my recommendations for each type of player. For early game players, I recommend you guys to grind out coins via farming or by making god books, or half god books also work. You just need to make like decent books that don't have bad enchants on them, and then afterwards you can sell them to the merchants or the auction house respectively. You sell the farming items to the merchant and you sell the books to the auction house. That is by far one of the best way to earn coins for early game players. And once you get those coins, I recommend you just going straight for the Raider's Axe, which you can find in the park at the Melancholic Viking, and get Scavenger 4 on it and go around the end to grind out top floor Enderman for coins to proceed to mid game. You may also want to buy a common, uncommon, or a rare Enderman pet to help you guys deal extra damage, which would help a lot, especially in early game, and can even be used for mid game. Now moving on to mid-game players. For mid-game players, I recommend you guys to flip the bazaar and to flip the auction house if you can, but if you can't do that, continue to enchant god books and sell them to the auction house, and slap Enderman with the Raider's Axe at the lower floors of the end. For example, slapping the 6000 health Enderman to get more coins, and to get more Ender armor to just sell to the NPC, or to get more Ender pearls to craft in the aspect of the ends to sell. The grind for mid-game players is similar to that for early game players, but once you get the coins, I recommend you to gun straight for the aspect of the dragons, since the aspect of the dragons are relatively cheap, and maybe get young dragon armor if you intend to grind zealots, and to proceed to late game. For late game players, yes, the fun has officially begun, but the grind has only gotten harder. However, you can now try to grind out zealots or to grind out slayers. At this stage of the game, I recommend for you to start investing heavily in good pets. If you do zealots, get a pet that gives extra speed like a horse pet to give you the advantage when grinding zealots. Or if you are rich enough, buy a legendary Enderman pet to increase the chance for you to summon a special zealot. And if you are doing slayers, just invest 6 to 7 million coins into a legendary wolf pet. It will make slayers go a lot faster because it gives combat XP, which means that it can summon the bosses a lot quicker. And also, I highly recommend getting the Tarantula and Mastiff armor sets, as they will make grinding a lot easier, and as well with a Mana Flux power orb, because they make grinding tier 4s really easy. And for endgame players, why are you still playing the game? But to be honest, there's nothing much left for you to do other than to get more coins and higher level skills. However, you may try to consider to grind for dungeons and to get the important items for dungeons, such as an Overflux power orb, Perfect 12, or maybe a legendary dragon pet, or even an elegant tuxedo. Honestly, as an endgame player, I am also getting bored, and I don't really have much to recommend at this stage, because you are at the end, basically. And with that, I hope you guys understood a lot more about my definitions of early, mid, late, and endgame players, and I hope that you guys took away a thing or two from this video. And with that, this is Furball the Hammy, the introverted hamster, signing out.